It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. It's hard to run as a Republican right now. President Donald Trump took us to war, and he's raised costs. Add to that fact that the sitting president's party often performs poorly in midterm elections. It's a trend that seems likely to continue this year. In general election polls, Democrat Jocelyn Benson has the lead. But in elections, anything can happen. Last week, there were two debates between the active Republican candidates for governor, Congressman John James, Mike Cox, and Perry Johnson. So who are they? And what do their campaigns tell us about the Republican Party in Michigan? Andrea Bitely has some ideas. She's the founder and principal of Bitely Communications, a Lansing-based public affairs firm. Andrea, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so there are three active Republican candidates for governor. We've had a Democratic governor in Michigan for a long time now. President Trump has some folks displeased with where we are, and that matters because Trump has a stronghold on the Republican Party. Before we get to the candidates, as you understand it, what are the priorities of the GOP in Michigan right now?
Right now, the number one priority of the Michigan Republican Party is getting Republicans elected. We went from having a Republican governor, a Republican attorney general, a Republican secretary of state, Republican Senate, conservative-dominated Supreme Court, to having none of that. It completely flipped from Republican to Democrat during Trump's first term in office. And there's really been no meaningful movement forward for the Republican Party to take things back. Right now, the Republicans in Lansing control the state House of Representatives, and that's it. The Supreme Court is a progressive, liberal-dominated court right now, and the state Senate is controlled by Democrats. Obviously, Gretchen Whitmer, Jocelyn Benson, and Dana Nessel, all Democrats. So the Republicans' biggest goal this year is to take back something in Lansing. Historically, they should be able to take back the governor's office. We've flip-flopped back and forth between D's and R's every single opportunity we've had. We reelect governors, but then we replace them with the opposite party.
So in other words, for you as a political consultant, it's a very interesting place to be. That is Michigan, because it is so purple. It goes back and forth. It is not a reliably red or blue state.
Absolutely. We are not reliably red. We are not reliably blue. We're barely reliably purple because we just transitioned so much. I would, in a normal time, put money on John James winning. But because of what's happening in Washington, because of what's happening globally, Jocelyn Benson is advantaged right now.
Well, let's talk about that. So President Trump is becoming less popular for a few reasons. His positions on Israel, for taking America to war with Iran, and for increasing costs with tariffs. What do you see his influence over the Republican Party in Michigan being right now?
Well, he endorsed John James, and that basically ended the Republican primary. Now, Perry Johnson and Mike Cox are still fighting tooth and nail with the hope that they can somehow take John James down a notch. But for the most part, Republicans in Michigan will follow what Donald Trump says, at least those that vote in the primaries in August. So John James got that endorsement. That's basically a done deal.
I want to think a little bit more about Congressman John James. So he is leading in the polls. I want to return to one of last week's debates, if we could. Here he is responding to Mike Cox, who said that James's business has sent jobs to China.
Mike Cox, I'm the son of a CEO who was a truck driver. His father was a mason. His father was a sharecropper. His father was a slave. How dare you shame the steps it takes to come up from Mississippi and build a life of prosperity for a family like mine. We've been dedicating our lives to service for people like you and people like you. And I'm going to continue that when I'm governor, because I understand what it takes to bring people together to accomplish tough missions and to make sure that everybody has prosperity. The things that we're going to be doing to use public resources to execute this is starting skilled trades training in public schools and in private schools. The things we're going to be doing is prioritizing over woke, vocational schools over woke universities that are trying to get rid of Western civilization. We're going to be making sure that we have healthier Michiganders, investing in wraparound services, public-private partnerships, so you can keep more money in your pocket. These are the types of things that are going to bring us together and make us all more healthy rather than resorting to cheap attacks.
Perhaps John James's most powerful excerpt from that debate, and he's saying that he comes from a hardworking family, that he's culturally on MAGA's side, and he'll support vocational training rather than prioritizing four-year colleges. Overall, what is James's biggest appeal?
James's biggest appeal for a lot of Republicans is his potential winnability factor. He has run statewide multiple times. He has great name ID. He's also someone who just has it in some ways, that wordless thing that a politician needs to get elected. He's had a lot of investment made by Republican campaign committees over the years. $100 million was the number that was bandied about during one of the debates. He has very good name ID. He will win this primary election. Not necessarily huge landslide because there are two other candidates in the race, but I would not be surprised if he gets 60% of the vote in the primary.
So in your eyes, it is not just about having the backing of President Trump. It is also about having the it factor. You see him as having both.
He definitely has the endorsement of President Trump, and he is really working on that it factor. He's telling his family story, which is similar to so many stories across the state of Michigan. People came to the state to work in the auto industry, to pull their way out of poverty. So that is a story that so many people can relate to. Mike Cox actually has an interesting story as well. He also comes from very working class roots, talking about his mom being a maid and his dad, a blue collar worker. So we have a lot of really interesting candidates in this race.
Let's listen to Mike Cox. Here he is at a debate.
I feel these issues. I felt them as Attorney General, and that's why I took on Blue Cross and saved over $700 million for seniors. That's why I took on the utility, saved over $3 billion in rates, which not only impacts you at your home, but also makes manufacturing cheaper and easier. I also took on Big Pharma. I also took on Walmart when they mislabeled food prices. So I've been in the fight for quite a long time. What do we need to do? Repeal Governor Whitmer's Green New Energy scam, which over the next 4 years, ladies and gentlemen, is going to add $11 billion to your rates. What else do we need to do? More competition in healthcare. We have too many consolidated hospitals, and that starts with going after Blue Cross, which created monopolies in insurance and healthcare.
Okay, so first, Mike Cox says that Governor Whitmer's investment in clean energy will cost residents $11 billion. No one has proven that to be true. But let's zoom out. More broadly, Mike Cox is making a bit more of a populist pitch here that is likely pretty resonant. He's trailing in the polls, though. What would it take for him to become more popular than John James?
It would take John James having an oopsie moment. For both Perry Johnson and Mike Cox. If John James had fallen on his face in either of these debates, if something groundbreaking came out in opposition research, it could potentially hurt John James. But right now, Mike Cox and Perry Johnson are significantly behind John James. So their ability to catch John James is relatively limited. But Mike Cox is giving it the college try, if you will. He is putting out there his record, which is something he should be standing on. I mean, your time as Attorney General allows you to litigate really in-depth issues, investigate really interesting criminal activities. So I'm not surprised that Mike Cox is using these points from his time in Lansing to highlight them as he's saying, hey, look, I'm a better opportunity for Republicans to win against Jocelyn Benson than John James is.
Now, yes, I mean, and this, again, feels like it would resonate with some voters, but you are going to tell me, I'm fairly certain that it factor that John James has and the support of President Trump will trump the issues that Cox is bringing to the table here.
The it factor and the endorsement of President Trump will definitely trump. That.
Okay, a big theme at the debates was low taxes, small government, cutting regulation. But There's also talk of the Republican Party becoming more populist, and Cox seems to be an example of this. And you do hear candidates say they'll take on big utility and health insurance companies. Again, here's looking at Cox. How much has the party changed over the last decade in Michigan?
Oh, the Republican Party broadly has changed significantly. You saw in the 60s when the Democrats and Republicans kind of flip-flopped during the civil rights movement. And I feel like we're seeing that again. One of the most interesting items I've noticed over the past week watching, debate week in Michigan was Abdul Al-Sayed talked about ending property taxes for seniors. And then the very next day, you heard Perry Johnson say he's going to end property taxes for seniors. So it was a very weird moment for me. I was sitting in the studio in Fox 2, and I heard Perry Johnson say that, and it just kind of clicked like, oh, he and Abdul Al-Sayed are on the same page on cutting property taxes or eliminating property taxes for seniors.
So even though voters might see them at opposite ends of the spectrum here, this is a playbook that candidates are taking from on both sides, and it is more of the populist playbook.
Absolutely. Folks are really playing into what they see as a populist way of living at this point with everything that's going on in the world globally. We're seeing, record inflation. We're seeing everything getting so expensive that it's what can I save money on? And the idea of not paying property taxes is something that will appeal to some, but those of us that have worked in government know that those property taxes go to fund our schools. So if people stop paying property taxes, I don't know how we're going to pay for elementary schools.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is Andrea Bitely. She's the founder of a public affairs firm. We're discussing the Republican race for governor in Michigan and what the candidates say about the current state of the party and our politics. I want to point out something that you didn't like these debates, particularly the one on Fox 2. You wrote in the Detroit Free Press that instead of being about policy, the debates were about bickering and interruptions. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Roop Raj at Fox 2 tried very hard to get each of the candidates to answer questions, to hold them to making those points. And it just sort of devolved the entire time into them fighting with each other, throwing opposition research points at each other. And it was honestly just a little disappointing. It says in my column, I worked for Mike Duggan. I did, and I'm very proud of the time I spent working for Mayor Duggan. And part of that was because we talked about policy. We talked about if the mayor was elected to be the governor, what he would do when we got into the office. We talked about deep education policy. We talked about data centers. We talked about the issues of the day in such a way that we knew what we were going to do should he have become governor. I worry that the candidates that were on the stage this week don't have those game plans in place, or at least aren't talking about them publicly yet.
So potentially you see the performative aspect of these debates telling us that they're overcompensating. But I mean, some people would say, look, this is what that format gives us. I mean, the more dramatic the candidates are, the more likely they are to get people's attention. That's what the medium rewards, essentially. So should we not have TV debates at all, but instead have long-form interviews on policy questions?
Well, I would listen to long-form interviews
Same.
on policy questions.
But not everyone.
Not everyone would. Craig Mauger hosted a debate at the Michigan Press Association this spring, as he reminded me in an X response to a tweet that I put out. And his wasn't like that. His debate also didn't include Jocelyn Benson or John James or Mike Duggan, the three frontrunners at the time. So when you insert the frontrunner, the other folks are more likely to just pile on and fight. So I think what we saw in the John James, Mike Cox, Perry Johnson debate was that first opportunity to pile on to John James. And so Perry Johnson, who's been running negative ads everywhere you can come up with negative ads placement, and Mike Cox, who's also been running a lot of negative advertising on John James, just piled on.
How much do you think voters are paying attention to that and that it's turning them away from folks? The candidates who are spending a lot of money on negative ads?
I think Americans and Michiganders in particular are just so over it. And that's something that we heard on the trail when I was working for Mayor Duggan. We would be you name the city in the state of Michigan, and one of the first comments we would always get would be, "Oh, I'm so glad you're not running negative ads," because you just hear the negativity over and over and over. And politics is already such a divisive issue that we then insert the negativity into it. It just turns people off.
I mean, I would be remiss not to note that Mike Duggan was getting it from all corners, too, every day, reliably in my inbox. I had an attack email from the Michigan Democrats when he was running. So it sounds to me like that was a concerted effort in his campaign for you all to try and rise above.
Absolutely. That was something we talked about every day, was how we were going to be not the negative campaign.
I mean, but are they effective, though? Is that why candidates run them? I mean, they do sow some level of skepticism in certain voters.
Absolutely. And if you hear a message 7 times, it's likely to stick, whether that be, buying a sandwich at your favorite fast food place, or something about Haley Stevens or Abdul El-Sayed or Perry Johnson or John James. It doesn't matter. If you hear something 7 times, your brain starts to retain it. So those ads running continuously, those are all going to start sticking in people's brains.
So it really is a gamble at this point, what's going to happen when you make that decision as a candidate. Here's a really interesting thing to think about, and that is, what does the Republican Party look like in Michigan after President Trump is no longer in office? Given the bigger theme here of our discussion today is that the candidate who has the backing of Trump tends to have success at the polls.
I think that depends on if John James wins. And there's also other Republicans that are running as well. You have Doug Lloyd, who's running for Attorney General, and Anthony Forlini, who's running for Secretary of State. If those candidates can pull it off, I think the Trump-type Republican with those endorsements can hang on. And right now, we don't know who will come after Trump. It could be a Marco Rubio, or it could be a Pete Buttigieg, or, we don't know who's next. So we've got Robin, these are a lot of big questions that I think about on a regular basis, and I don't have an answer for you.
Give me one last question then that you're thinking about that's top of mind for you when it comes to this race.
In the Republican governor's race, I'm just honestly interested in seeing what the numbers look like. I'm really interested to see what the absentee ballot numbers are. Is it 40%, 60%? Of Republican votes coming in by absentee, or are Republicans voting in person, as the president has insisted that Republicans should do?
That is going to tell us a lot about the Trump effect. Andrea Bitely is the founder and principal of Bitely Communications, a Lansing-based public affairs firm. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Coming up, the Ann Arbor Art Fair is back, and we'll hear a new episode of Container from Tia Graham. That's right here on the Metro. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. We'll be right back after the news from NPR and WDET.